The stars stretched across the black sky like a sea of diamonds. Inside the great ship, Ethan Cole walked through the metal corridors, his boots echoing softly. He had just been given his orders, and he was still trying to understand them. The new protocol paired crew members in the same quarters to reduce stress during long missions. Ethan thought it was strange, but rules were rules. He stopped at the door of his assigned quarters. The number flashed in blue. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was simple, with 2 beds on opposite sides, a metal table, and a soft hum from the life support system. What caught Ethan's eyes was the person already inside. A young woman stood by the bed on the left, her long hair catching the light from the ceiling. She turned to face him, and for a second, Ethan forgot how to speak. Her name was Alara, at least, that was what the file said. She wore the standard black uniform, but something about the way she stood, calm and graceful, made Ethan feel like she was not just another officer. She gave him a small smile. "You must be Ethan," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Yes," Ethan replied quickly, trying not to look nervous. "Looks like we're bunkmates." She nodded, her eyes holding his for a moment before she turned back to her bed. Ethan set his small bag down and sat on his side. His thoughts were running fast. He had never shared a room on a mission before, let alone with someone like her. There was a quiet strength about her, and something else he could not place. The first hours passed with small talk. They spoke about their duties, the mission, and life back home. Lara was kind but private. She answered his questions but never gave too much away. Still, Ethan found himself listening closely to every word. He noticed she smiled more when he talked about Earth's sunsets and rivers. When the lights dimmed for a night's cycle, Ethan lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. He was still wide awake when he felt the mattress shift slightly. He turned his head and froze. Alara had crossed the small space between their beds and was now lying beside him. Her arm slid over his chest gently, and her head rested against his shoulder. "Wait," Ethan whispered, his heart racing. "What are you doing?" "I can't sleep alone," she said calmly, her eyes already half closed. "It's how I've always slept. It helps me feel safe." Ethan could not move. He wanted to say something, but the words would not come. He felt the warmth of her arm, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. He stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning. He was trained for space battles and navigation, not this. Minutes passed, and slowly, Ethan's tense body began to relax. Her presence was strange, but it was not unwelcome. It felt comforting. He closed his eyes, telling himself it was just part of the mission, just something he had to accept. But deep down, he knew this was the start of something he did not understand. As the ship moved through the endless night, Ethan lay there with Alara beside him, her trust resting on his shoulder. For the first time since the mission began, he did not feel alone, and that thought stayed with him long after sleep finally came. The next morning, Ethan woke up slowly, feeling the soft hum of the engines around him. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then he felt the warmth against his side and froze again. Alara was still there, her head resting on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her breathing was calm and steady. For a second, Ethan just stared at her, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He moved gently, trying not to wake her. When he slipped out of bed, Alara stirred and opened her eyes. She looked at him with a calm smile, as if nothing was strange about what had happened. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Ethan replied, feeling awkward. About the back of his neck. "About last night. It helped me sleep," she said simply, cutting him off. "Thank you." Ethan did not know what to say. He nodded and began to get ready for his shift. He told himself it was not his place to question her habits, but he could not stop thinking about it. This was not standard for any crew pairing he had heard of. The day passed in silence for the most part. Ethan worked on his station, checking navigation systems and power flow. The mission was running smooth. Still, his mind kept going back to that moment in the dark. He wondered why she needed that kind of comfort. She did not look weak. In fact, she carried herself with confidence and calm. There was more to her than he understood. When the night cycle came again, Ethan tried to prepare himself. He told himself that maybe it was just the first night, and she would stay in her own bed. But when he turned off the lights and lay down, he felt the same soft movement. A moment later, she was there, close to him, her arms sliding across his chest like before. Ethan took a deep breath. "Alara," he whispered, This is unusual. People don't usually do this. She stayed quiet for a moment before speaking. Where I come from, people do. We believe that sharing warmth makes us strong. It reminds us we're not alone. Ethan turned his head and looked at her in the dim light. You're not afraid someone will find out? No, she said. Because I trust you. Those words hit him harder than he expected. Trust. It was a big thing out here in the cold void of space. He felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something else he could not name. He closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. The next days followed the same pattern. During the day, they worked like normal officers. At night, she would come to his bed, and they would fall asleep like that, close together. At first, Ethan thought he would never get used to it, but soon, it became something he looked forward to. Though he would never admit it out loud. One evening, after a long shift, they sat together in their quarters, eating the simple rations the ship provided. Ilara looked thoughtful, her eyes on the metal wall, as if she was seeing something far away. Ethan, she said quietly, do you ever feel like everything is bigger than you? Like you're just a small piece in something you can't control? He nodded slowly. All the time. I used to feel safe, she said. Before I was sent here, before all of this, but now, sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, like someone wants to hurt me. Ethan looked at her, surprised. You think someone's after you? She gave a small shrug. I don't know, but it's hard to sleep when you feel that way. Ethan sat back, her words echoing in his mind. Maybe this was more than just a habit. Maybe she was afraid, and this was her way of staying strong. He wanted to ask more, but he could see in her eyes that she had already said more than she planned. That night, when the lights dimmed and she moved close to him again, Ethan did not resist. He let her rest her head against him, feeling the quiet weight of her trust. As the ship sailed through the endless dark, he stared at the ceiling, wondering what secrets she carried and what role he was meant to play in all of this. The days turned into weeks, and life on the ship settled into a steady rhythm. Ethan still worked his shifts, checked systems, and reported to the captain like everyone else, but things were different now. Every night ended the same way, with Ilara close to him. It had become normal, even though he knew it was not. He stopped questioning it out loud, though inside he still wondered what it really meant. One evening, after a long day of patrol duty, Ethan walked into the quarters and found Ilara sitting by the small table. She had her hair tied back, and her face looked tired. She was holding a thin metal case in her hands, staring at it like it carried the weight of the world. When she noticed him, she quickly closed it and set it aside. Long day, Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. She gave a small smile, something like that. He wanted to ask what was in the case, but he decided not to push her. Instead, he sat across from her and opened his meal pack. They ate in silence for a while, the hum of the engines filling the room. Finally, Ethan spoke. You've been quiet lately, he said. Ilara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I've been thinking. It's about home. About why I'm here. Ethan leaned back, watching her carefully. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. She shook her head. No, you've been good to me, you should know. Ethan waited, his heart beating faster for reasons he didn't understand. She looked down at her hands and spoke softly. I wasn't supposed to be just another officer, she said. I was sent here because someone wanted me safe, but even out here I don't feel safe. I keep thinking someone will find me. Ethan froze. Words hit hard. He had guessed she was important, but he'd never imagined this. Safe from who? He asked quietly. She shook her head again. People who don't want peace. People who want power, no matter what it costs. She lifted her eyes to his. That's why I stay close to you. It's not just comfort. I trust you. Ethan sat there, speechless. He had thought this was just a strange habit, maybe part of her culture. But now he understood it was more than that. She was scared. She needed someone, and somehow, she had chosen him. He wanted to say something, to promise her he would keep her safe, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he reached out and covered her hand with his. Her fingers were cold at first, then warm as they stayed together. For a brief moment, the room felt quiet, almost peaceful. That night, when they lay down, Ethan held her without hesitation. She rested her head against him, her breath steady, but he could feel the tension in her body. He wanted to take that fear away, but all he could do was stay close and hope it helped. The next day, everything changed. An alarm woke them in the middle of the sleep cycle. Sharp red light flashed across the room, and a voice called over the speakers all crew to stations, possible hostile contact. Ethan jumped out of bed, pulling on his boots and jacket. Lara was already moving, her face pale but focused. They ran through the corridors together, the ship shaking under their feet. People shouted orders, and the sound of weapons arming filled the air. When they reached the control deck, Ethan took his position, scanning the radar. A group of ships had appeared out of nowhere, moving fast. They weren't friendly. Captain shouted commands, and everyone rushed to prepare for battle. Ethan looked over at Alara, who stood near the communication console, her hands clenched. For a second, their eyes met, and he saw fear there, but also something else: determination. He wanted to run to her, to tell her it would be fine, but there was no time. The enemy ships were closing in, and the battle for survival was about to begin. The first blast hit the ship like a hammer, shaking the metal walls and throwing people off balance. Lights flickered as alarms screamed through the corridors. Ethan gripped the edge of his console, his heart pounding as red signals filled the radar screen. Enemy ships were all around them, moving fast and firing without warning. Shields at 60%. Psst, someone shouted. Return fire, the captain ordered. Ethan worked fast, adjusting power routes and checking systems. The engines roared as the ship turned sharply, trying to dodge incoming fire. Another blast hit harder this time. Sparks rained from a panel nearby. Smoke filled the air with the sharp smell of burning wires. Ethan's eyes darted toward Alara. She was still at the communication station, sending out distress signals and relaying commands, her face calm but tense. Their eyes met for a split second, and that was enough. He could see fear there, but also strength. She wasn't the type to run, even when everything was falling apart. Ethan, the voice of his team leader, snapped him back. Route power to the forward shields now. I'm on it, Ethan shouted, his fingers flying over the screen. The hum of the engines changed as power shifted. The shields flickered but held, at least for now. Another hit sent a shockwave through the deck. A loud crack split the air as a support beam fell near the communication station. Ethan didn't think. He leapt from his station and ran toward Alara. She saw it falling, but there was no time for her to move. Ethan slammed into her, pushing her out of the way as the beam crashed where she had been standing. Pain exploded in Ethan's shoulder as he hit the floor hard. He heard Alara call his name, but the sound of gunfire and alarms drowned everything else. She helped him up, her hands gripping his arms tightly, winced, feeling the sharp ache in his side, but he managed to stand. You're hurt, she said, her voice shaking for the first time. I'm fine, Ethan lied, forcing a grin. Stay down. The captain ordered emergency lockdown for several sections as more enemy ships closed in. Crew members scrambled, firing defense weapons and sealing damaged areas. Ethan and Alara stayed near the main deck, doing everything they could to help. Time blurred as minutes felt like hours. Every sound of metal tearing made Ethan think the end was near. Finally, after what felt like forever, the enemy ships broke off. The last signal on the radar faded as they jumped to another sector. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and the distant crackle of fires being put out. Ethan sank against the wall, breathing hard. His uniform was torn and his shoulder burned with pain. Alara knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for injuries. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice thick. Ethan gave a small laugh, even though it hurt, and let a support beam crush you. Not happening. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The ship around them was broken and smoking, but all Ethan could see were her eyes. There was something there now, something stronger than fear. Gratitude, trust, something more. When the medics arrived, they tried to take Ethan to the medical bay, but Alara stayed by his side. She refused to leave, even when the captain called for her. No one argued. They all saw what Ethan had done. Later, as Ethan lay on the medbay bed, Alara sat next to him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I told you before that I trusted you, she said quietly. Now, I owe you my life. Ethan smiled weakly. You don't owe me anything. We look out for each other, right? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and held his hand, her fingers warm against his. They stayed like that in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging in the air. Outside, the stars kept moving, cold and endless. But inside that small room, there was something different now, something neither of them could deny anymore. The repair crews worked around the clock for the next 2 days. The ship had taken heavy damage, but it was still flying. Most of the systems were back online, and the danger had passed, at least for now. Ethan spent those days in the medical bay, his shoulder wrapped and his ribs sore from the hit he had taken. He hated lying still, but every time he tried to move, the pain reminded him he was not ready yet. Alara visited him every day. At first she sat in silence, her eyes always watching the door like she expected something to happen. And slowly she began to talk. She told him about her life before the mission, about the pressure she had lived under. She spoke about the people who wanted to stop peace, and how every day she feared they would succeed. Her voice was calm, but Ethan could hear the weight behind every word. One evening, after most of the crew had gone to rest, Alara sat beside his bed again. The medbay was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "You saved me," she said. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan gave a small smile. "You already did. You stayed." She shook her head. "It's not enough. You risked everything for me." He met her eyes, his voice steady. "I would do it again." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, and when she held on, Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just trust anymore, it was something deeper. When Ethan was cleared to leave the medbay, the ship had already set course for the central station where the peace talks would happen. The corridors were quiet that night as they walked together toward their quarters. Ethan felt tired, but being beside her gave him strength. When they reached the door, Alara paused before opening it. "After this mission," she said softly, "everything will change. I'll have to go back. I'll have to be who I am again." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "But I don't want to forget this. I don't want to forget you." He smiled faintly. "Then don't." Inside the room, everything was the same as before the 2 beds, the small table, the quiet hum of the ship. But it didn't feel the same. It felt smaller now, like it could no longer hold what had grown between them. Ethan sat on his bed and Alara moved closer, sitting beside him. For a moment, they just stayed like that, the silence soft around them. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked, her voice calm. Ethan laughed quietly. "Hard to forget. I needed someone then," she said. "I found you." "I didn't expect that. I didn't expect any of this." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "Neither did I." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just like she had on that first night. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just about safety anymore. It was about something they couldn't put into words, something that had grown in the dark while the stars moved outside. When the lights dimmed for the final night of the mission, Ethan lay down with Alara beside him, her arm across his chest, like always. He closed his eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel cold or empty. It felt like something worth fighting for. The next day, the ship reached the central station. The peace talks would begin soon, and Alara would step into her role, carrying the hopes of many. Ethan knew that duty would pull her away, maybe forever. But as they stood at the viewport together, watching the bright lights of the station grow larger, she reached for his hand and held it tight. "Whatever happens after this," she said, "I'll never forget what you gave me." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "And I'll never forget you." The stars burned bright beyond the glass, endless and silent. The mission was almost over, but something new had begun, something that no distance or duty could erase.